Okay, well, welcome to this evening. And our topic, finding a way to live together, a special presentation of all three Braver Angels Washington alliances. Tonight, we'll be breaching the Cascade Curtain for our conversation with Bill Doherty, Braver Angels founder, and John Wood Jr., who is a national ambassador. They're both speaking to us tonight from deep blue Seattle area, Mukilteo. And I am joining you. I'm Lani Madsen. I will be your host for this event from the Cloverdale Ranch, about 35 miles west of Spokane in the reddest county in the state of Washington. So we've got that balance that Braver Angels always strives for. Bill Doherty is a well-respected educator, marriage and family therapist, and the designer of the Braver Angels workshop approach to depolarizing conversations and communication in families and in communities. John Wood Jr. has a background that's just made for building bridges. He was raised by his biracial and bipartisan parents to be an independent thinker, I think, and worked on the Obama campaign, and yet later ran for Congress as a Republican. So it's my pleasure to introduce both Bill and John to the state of Washington. My background is I'm a freelance writer and columnist for the Spokesman Review. I'm there to be the conservative balance on the newspaper. Also podcasting, publishing on Substack, and a retired architect and rancher. So we have people with a diversity of backgrounds here. And I am happy to invite all of the audience as well to be participants. In the second half, we're going to be taking questions from the audience. You've got two options. One is if question comes to mind in the course of our conversation, you don't want to lose that thought, go ahead and just type it right into the chat, or if you don't want to ask it yourself out loud, type those questions into the chat, and our tech support, Yvonne Boyd and John Moran, will take care of you that way. Or when we get to that Q&A part, we'll offer an opportunity to raise a hand, and we'll try and call on as many people as we can to keep the conversation going. So we're working on that, finding a way to live together. And I just have a starting question for Bill. I wanted to give him an opportunity to talk about the inspiration. First of all, Bill, I'll tell you how I explain it when somebody asks, what is Braver Angels? And I say, well, there was this guy who's a family therapist, and he looked at the results after the 2016 election and said, this country needs counseling. And I have to say that resonates with everybody I've ever used that line with. But how would you expand on that?
Well, don't give it up, even though it's wrong. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that, though. The original inspiration, it came from David Blankenhorn, who's our president, and David Lapp, who's also a founder. They were on a phone call shortly after the 2016 presidential election, and they came up with this idea, kind of on an impulse, of getting 10 Hillary Clinton voters and 10 Donald Trump voters together for 13 hours over a weekend in Southwest Ohio in early December, because they were aware of how differently people in New York City, where David Blankenhorn lived, and people in Southwest Ohio were feeling about all of this. In New York City, it was gloom and doom, the world is ending. And in Southwest Ohio, it was hope and change, morning in America. And they said, this is a divided nation. Let's see if we can get people to talk to each other, not just about each other. And then that was the original inspiration, and they didn't know what to do with them when they got them together. And so they asked me to help design it. That happens to be the true story. I like yours better because it makes me the one with the idea. Anyway, I have to give you the actual truth.
Well, I'll tweak it slightly, but still the point being that we could use all these little counseling, I think.
That's right. Well, and in fact, just to be serious, that I used everything I ever learned in marriage counseling, family therapy, and working with groups to design it. So the truth is there are elements of this work to bring together two groups who are at odds with each other, and you blame the other side for the relationship problem.
And John, how did you come to be involved with Braver Angels? You had an involvement in politics, and what made you look to this as a place to put your energy?
Yeah, well, you talked, you sort of made reference to a little bit of my story. And if there are folks on the line who are sort of familiar with me and my journey, likely will have heard bits and pieces of this before, but my way of sort of summarizing this is to sort of share what was kind of a typical sort of presentation from me on the campaign trail way back in 2014 when I ran for Congress. So I ran in the California 43rd, Los Angeles. It's a district that is overwhelmingly Black and Latino and left-leaning, but also has strong pockets of white conservatives in some of the suburban areas. And so people would ask me, the age of 26, whether I was speaking to a Black Democratic leaning church in South Central Los Angeles or to a white Tea Party club in South Bay LA County, what makes you qualified to represent a district as diverse and complicated as the California 43rd? And I'd say, well, I come from an interesting family background. My mother is a liberal Black Democrat from inner city Los Angeles. My father is a conservative white Republican from Tennessee. I grew up explaining my mother to my father, and my father to my mother. That's why I can represent all of you. Tended to be good for a laugh. I grew up thinking of myself as a liberal activist. Went through a series of experiences that sort of shifted me in a more conservative direction. I did work on the Obama campaign in 2008. And I tell people today, I say, people have sort of horror stories sometimes in terms of why they kind of move politically. I tell people I did not have an ugly divorce with liberalism. I'm still on good terms with my ex, so to speak. And actually, the thing that remained consistent was I really believed in this Obama idea of hope and change and moving towards sort of a post-partisan, post-racial America. And that remained with me as I went into Republican politics. The problem was that in trying to bring that attitude to sort of party politics, I found that it was not an atmosphere conducive to empathy and reconciliation by any means. And so I tried to sort of build programming in the digital media space that would highlight the voices of people who would be not just right or left, but right and left, disagreeing about policy, but agreeing about how we ought to treat each other in politics. And then somebody pointed out to me the existence of an organization called Better Angels. And I looked at the work that Bill Doherty was doing, that David Blankenhorn, David Lapp, and a number of others were doing in local communities, bringing people together on the ground. And I had been trying to do that sort of in the digital space, on YouTube, through podcasts and programming. And so I brought sort of this idea of the digital media structure dedicated to depolarization to Better Angels, but given my larger sort of background and experience in politics and race and community organizing and so forth, sort of just very quickly became a general sort of spokesperson, ambassador, and strategist for the organization. And so I volunteered fall and winter of 2017, came on officially as a member of staff in March of 2018, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Okay. And Bill, did you ever think it would get as much momentum behind it? I know that John, you just used one of the original name of the organization, Better Angels, in the quote, appealing to the better angels of our nature. But tell me about that transformation to Braver Angels and the growth of the organization.
Well, the change to Braver Angels was because somebody else owned the trademark for Better Angels and took umbrage that we were using it. Somebody actually donated money to us instead of them one time, and that was sort of the bitter end. So we changed our name, and we like Braver Angels. We like it. We think it takes courage now. So that's how we got there. But in terms of this question about did the two Davids and I ever think that we would be where we are today? Not for me. In fact, that first workshop, I thought it was going to be a one-off. It would be a great story someday to tell. But that group did not want to stop the Ohio First Red Blue and cashed in another frequent flyer ticket and flew back there. And we just thought we owe it to ourselves and the country to keep going. There was no big strategic plan. There was just, let's just keep at it and see if something clicks.
So what are some things that people have told you over the years that are their stories for why they've sought out Braver Angels?
Well, the two main things that I hear, they're worried about their country and their family, their relationships. So big story, division in the country, and then division in their lives, particularly their family relationships, are the two biggest reasons why I hear people come to our workshops.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It has always seemed to me that you have people who come to us for what on the surface almost look like sort of diametrically sort of opposed reasons. On the one hand, you have people who are seeking to heal from the wounds that they've experienced through polarization. You know, as Bill mentioned, people who have a difficult time maintaining relationship with their children, their parents, their spouse, or getting along with colleagues and classmates. Then on the other hand, I think that you also have, and so these are people who sort of want to sort of heal from the fight, but then you have people who in a sense want to go deeper into it because they're dissatisfied with the way the system works. They want to see good governance. They want to advocate for a functioning democracy. They actually want to go deeper into politics per se in some sense, but they don't want to do it in a way that reinforces the toxicity and the animosity that characterizes so much of it, right? They're looking for a new and a better way. But from each of these directions, you have people coming together in an effort to heal themselves and their relationships, but also in an effort to repair society. And somehow or other, there's some chemistry and magic in that, which equals what we are at Braver Angels.
I know that what drew me into Braver Angels was watching a debate post 2020 election on just discussing all of the claims about the election, whether it was stolen, whether there was suppression, whether there was sufficient integrity, all of that whole panoply of questions that came up. And I understand that was actually a very difficult conversation for the Braver Angels board to have. Could you tell us a little bit about how that came about, and maybe start with a bit about Braver Angels debates for those who've never experienced listening to one?
I want to take that, John.
Do you want to say a little bit about the debate program, and I'll say a little bit about the decision to discuss?
Sure, I'll take the easy one.
There you go.
Yeah, so our debate program was an inspiration that came from April Cornfield, who said that when she was at Yale, there was this great debate process that she just loved, and she described it. And I remember thinking at the beginning, our workshops are not debates, we stay away from that. But she described it in such a way that it created, like our other workshops, a container for people to bring their differences with respect and not reactivity and escalation. And so there's a lot of work that goes into the debate topic and resolution. You get together either live or on Zoom, a group of people who differ on that. And we've done it, in every topic you could imagine. And there are a series of speeches that people give. There are some people prepared coming into it to give like 4-minute speeches pro or con the resolution. And then after each speech, there are questions that people ask, and the questions are delivered to the debate chair. So if you were the chair and I was asking John a question and John had gone first, I would say, Madam Chair, I wonder if the previous speaker has considered such and such, or I wonder if he could elaborate because my facts are different from that, and I'm interested in how he got to his conclusion. And can you see that my saying it to you, as opposed to saying it, John, where did you get those facts? Okay. Then he would, I would be more up to deliver it with a little oomph. He might react with a little oomph, and then we're off to the races. So there are there's ground rules and process, formality, if you will, that creates a sense that we're in this together. People are encouraged to listen and even change their mind. So some debates I've been in, people have actually, including me, on one very interesting topic. I spoke a couple of times and I learned some things from what some other people were saying. There were actually some people that actually knew the topic a lot better than me. And I found myself doing some shifting. And that's perfectly okay, as opposed to a debate where I'm just defending my team. So they're not teams. You come as an individual, you come to listen, to express yourself. with respect. So that's the process.
Right, right. And so, we have this debate format, and we pride ourselves on being willing to live up to our name, right? To be brave enough to engage even some of the most controversial topics if we think that there's a real sort of societal need for that. How you assess that need, of course, is kind of a topic unto itself. And so, in the aftermath of the 2020 election, after actually the inauguration, there was such powerful doubt in America, and certainly within the Republican Party, as to the legitimacy of President Biden's election. You had this point of view, which was a deeply held, belief that the election was stolen, or very well might have been stolen through voter fraud. That was undermining people's confidence in the system and so forth. And yet on the other side, you had a very strong belief among many that not only is this information wrong, but it is an outgrowth of sheer propaganda, and that to talk about it in any legitimate form is to legitimize the point of view in a way that presents a clear and present social danger to American democracy, right? And so you have this impasse between these two sides, passionately felt in each direction. And of course, at Braver Angels, it's our job to try and create space for empathy and understanding to flourish, in the gap. And so, I said to, I remember having a conversation with David Blankenhorn not too long after the inauguration, where I said, and I think others in the organization were having this conversation, but we really can't. I was of the opinion that we could not credibly sort of claim to be extending an invitation to all Americans to participate in our work if we were not also allowing space for people to talk about the issues that were most important to them, right? And because it's not exactly, I have my own individual opinions on any given issue. I think we all do as leaders of Braver Angels, as volunteers and members. But as an organization, we don't take a position on any particular policy issue. One, because we have perspectives in every direction, so we practically couldn't. But two, if we did that, we would be closing the door to open and equal participation from all sides. And so I made the case to David, and others I think were considering the possibility that we need to be willing to create space for folks to talk about this and for us to maybe even debate the issue. At the same time, we knew that if we did that, it would certainly incur a good deal of resistance and maybe even anger from folks who, for extremely understandable reasons, right, felt that this is not something that we should be legitimizing through any sort of program. And so what happened was I sent so trying to remember the order of events here. This was, I guess, in late winter, early spring of 2021. We discussed internally and agreed that we ought to hold a Braver Angels debate on this topic, on the topic of voter fraud. We sent out a newsletter sort of letting folks know that we were planning on doing this. The backlash to that newsletter, which I think I did author, was as intense, was more intense, I think, than any response we'd ever got to anything we'd done from folks who felt that this wasn't a conversation that we should be having. But it went far beyond just some of our members and subscribers. So I think that as soon as we posted something on social media, about 5 seconds later, we had a volunteer send us a message in the inbox saying, "I quit." We had somebody who represented one of our strongest foundation supporters come very close to sending us an email saying, considering pulling funding. We had we had very important members of staff voice opposition, including somebody who's very active and committed social justice activist who said, I don't know if I can continue with this organization if you guys choose to do this. And so, the question sort of became, how can we go through with this in a way that honors our commitment to all sides? We released a podcast that was sort of an internal staff meeting captured in a recorded conversation that included myself, David Blankenhorn, and April Cornfield, and also Kieran O'Connor, our Chief Marketing Officer, and Silas Kulkarni, who at the time was a member of staff who was very much opposed to us even having the debate. And we had a conversation about why we would have the conversation, right? And Silas spoke very eloquently in defense of the idea that some conversations were a threat to democracy and should not be had. My own position was that even if one believes that a certain position is wrong, that we still have to create space for us to bring our disagreements into contact with each other so that we can give each other the opportunity to bring our errors into contact with reality. And that if we believe a position is wrong and dangerously wrong, that if what we do is to sort of move it out of our eyesight in the context of our democratic discussions, we may remove it from a certain platform or space, but that view continues to gain currency among those who believe it, right? We have to give ourselves the opportunity to interrupt each other's narratives in favor of truth if we think that we have the truth. But we can't do that outside of relationship. We can't do that outside of engaging each other in communication and conversation and debate. And so we released a podcast where we had this conversation, and then we had the debate itself. The debate itself, according to the overwhelming feedback that we got, was remarkably successful because we had folks who disagreed with the voter fraud claim, folks who agreed with it, and also that same member of staff, Silas Kulkarni, who participated in the debate to argue not only was the election not stolen, but we should not be debating whether the election was stolen in the first place. In other words, he participated in the debate to say that he disagreed with the premise of the debate, right? But that too is a legitimate position to have in Braver Angels and in a Braver Angels debate. And I think that what most people who watched that event observed unfold in real time was people deeply listening to points of view and perspectives that they would not generally have had the opportunity to have engaged with in real time, coming from political opposites whose intentions towards goodwill they trusted, right? And what it meant was that people who did not believe in the people who believed in the stolen election claim were taking these arguments very seriously on their end and were being listened to very attentively going the other way. And so that creates the space for open-mindedness and progress, right? And so when I sent out the following newsletter, linking to that debate and overviewing the process by which we got there, the response I got the second time around that we got to that could not have been more positive. Overwhelming approval from Democrats and Republicans alike in the aftermath of that event, including a response from the same foundation representative who very nearly pulled funding previously, saying something along the lines of, I was extremely skeptical. I was thinking you people were crazy. Now that I've watched the debate, I realize I was wrong. You guys know what you're doing, you know? So it was a tremendous victory, but it required being brave enough to drive over some rocky roads to get there.
Yeah, it is an excellent debate. Anybody who has not had a chance to view it, I would recommend it. What I appreciated from it was that not only did you tackle an extremely difficult topic, but that I heard people listening, and I noticed that among the 8 people that were the presenters, 4 on kind of on each side, that there was movement from everyone. Everyone found a little bit of something that they took away from it, and that format in itself was really engaging. And so, what are some workshops that you would recommend to Washington alliances? We have, in fact, I know that you are speaking today or working with the Washington State Association of Counties. So everybody from here in Washington, your county commissioners have now listened to Bill Doherty speak. What did you tell them, and what should we do as our county commissioners come back to our counties? How could we maybe build on that foundation that you've started?
Well, I did a keynote for the whole group in which I described polarization. I engaged them in conversations, of about 120 of them, about the sources of polarization, which it was so interesting. The first one that came out was social media. I engaged them in conversation about where polarization is showing up in their work as county commissioners. And one of the things that struck me is that the level of intensity, the level of aggravation that people are feeling is turning almost every issue they deal with into one of hot conflict, and that they're getting it from both the left and the right. And they're getting it from colleagues as well as constituents. And some of them are just getting overwhelmed. And these are very experienced people. This was the leadership conference. These were leaders of county commissioners, around the state. And a lot of them have been doing it for years. And the last 5 years in particular is just getting beyond anything they've experienced. So one of my messages was that I think it's time for elected officials together to name polarization as the problem, to name divisiveness and rancor. And then I said to not immediately then follow up with, well, yes, we're polarized, there's too much rancor, and your side is mainly to blame. And once you do that, you just added to it. But that just like a couple in a relationship, I said, the starting point for the couple is to say, we have a problem, and it doesn't only reside in thee, okay? That it's both of us. And to see if they could begin to rally their communities around, we're divided and we're paralyzed. We have to get past this, and to consider Braver Angels as a resource in their community. Because I said Brave Angels is strong in Washington. We can even get stronger, and we have offerings and workshops. We can help to seed the competencies needed to function in this day and age. And then in my skills workshop, about 70 of them came to to the workshop. And the workshop was on managing difficult conversations with constituents, and a lot of it was basic Braver Angel skills adapted for elected officials. But a key message that we've been saying to elected officials is, this day and age with so little trust and so much hostility, additional skills, upgraded skills are necessary for this era. And that's what we worked on. That's what we worked on. And they were very responsive, told lots of stories, and were very responsive. So I think we planted some seeds here, and I know that some of the leaders came up to Elizabeth Dole was there, for example, and came up, and a lot of them really want to engage with us. We are, bottom line, we are a resource for them for a problem they know they have.
I mentioned that I'm a short distance from Spokane County, and Spokane County has will have a split 3 and 2 county commission. They've had 3 county commissioners. There's still some rancor there from being forced to expand to 5 from 3, forced by the state. So they're already starting out with some people's backs on edge, but they really need to figure out how to work together. I don't know. I'd like to invite you to come over and have an opening session.
One of their leaders was at my workshop who told me the story.
Yes.
And they have to be bipartisan now for the first time. So I told him a story. I'm always interested in stories of hope because things are kind of dismal. I told him this story. The governor, the newly elected governor of Pennsylvania, Shapiro, who is a moderate Democrat, he started out as a county commissioner in, I believe, Delaware County, just outside Philadelphia, where I grew up. And it was a 3-member board of county commissioners, and 2 Democrats and a Republican. He was the chair of the board as a Democrat. And I know this story to be true because I talked to his chief of staff, who I ran into at the meeting. He decided that all policies had to be unanimously agreed upon, that they were not going to override the Republican. And he stuck to that his entire career as a county commissioner. Now, that can't necessarily be replicated everywhere, but that's powerful. That's powerful.
Well,
And
it is a way of saying that you're going to be sure you're representing the entire community, which is clearly not one or the other.
yes, yes. So there are examples. So I mentioned that to your county commissioner who went, whoa. He went, whoa. So we're developing the next workshop we're going to be piloting in New Hampshire with state legislators the new state legislators in December, is managing difficult conversations with colleagues. Because it's similar skills, but additional skills that people need with colleagues who they have to work with week after week, year after year.
Mm-hmm. Well, a question from the red side of the state that feels that our state capital ignores us. We've had one party control in the state capital for quite a while, and it's not the party that's more popular over here. And there has been a shutting out, or it's experienced as a shutting out in a lot of ways, even though, the vast majority of legislation that gets passed really is bipartisan, because it's really kind of basic, keeping the lights on kind of stuff. That stuff isn't a problem. But the things that are at all contentious, we're not really having good dialogue. Now, I happen to know that the signups for this event, very, very heavily blue. So if you could give some advice to those who are in the majority of how they can be part of depolarizing a conversation to encourage the side that their majority side to better incorporate creative ideas from the other team, what kind of advice could we give to the constituents of those blue legislators?
John? You do the hard questions. Okay?
Well, it's context is always, of course, worth being mindful of. I mean, there's a way in which these sorts of political conversations across difference that take place between two elected officials, unfold in a different sort of environment than the conversation I might have with my neighbor. The conversation I have with my neighbor is important. Of course, we're both going to vote, but it's mostly important because, the relationship that exists between the American people sets the tone from which we wind up selecting our elected officials, the environment within which we conduct the relationships of our families, the operations of our institutions, our workplaces. There's sort of a rippling out effect that each of us plays a small but a very real part in. But two elected officials, of course, are having disagreements that could result in a bill being passed or not being passed. There's issues of power and the distribution of resources and various other sort of interests that attach themselves to that conversation, which tend to operate in the minds of electeds as they communicate with each other. But having said all that, the fundamentals of relationship building, getting an understanding of the life experience or the lived experience of the people that you serve with as a means of humanizing them so that you may generate interpersonal trust and understanding across the spectrum of disagreement so that you can work together more effectively, so that you can reason together more clearly. And so that maybe, just maybe, you may be able to sort of represent each other to your own constituencies in a way that doesn't necessarily paint that other party as a demon on the basis of the R or D next to their name. Those fundamentals apply to cross-partisan discourse in general, because those are simply the elements by which we can develop human relationships that work and function, particularly in a free society, in a complex democracy, right? So it used to be much more normal, particularly in Congress, for elected officials to actually spend recreational time together. That was a part of the bipartisan culture of Washington, a culture that went back, many decades and was at very much a high point in the years following World War II, when the Great Society was ultimately passed and implemented in the civil rights legislation of things. I remember hearing a story that Chris Matthews on MSNBC, who used to work formerly there, who used to work in the office of Tip O'Neill, Democratic Speaker, Democratic leader in the House of Representatives during Ronald Reagan's administration, Chris told a story about how one day Ronald Reagan came into their office looking for Tip. Tip wasn't there. And Chris Matthews said to him, he said, "Mr. President," he said, "you've wandered behind enemy lines." And Ronald Reagan responded by saying something along the lines of, "Not after 6. We're all friends after 6 o'clock." Right. And, and of course, as contentious as those years may have been in many ways, Ronald Reagan, the Republicans were able to work with Democrats in Congress to lower inflation, to enact reforms to Social Security, to reform the tax code. There were many sort of bipartisan victories during those years, which would scarcely seem possible today, right? And so, the polarization of the culture of relationship building that used to exist, in the federal government, and I believe something similar has happened in state governments. That just goes to show how fundamental our ability to get along really is to our capacity to govern, right? And so an empathy and a willingness to sort of take in and absorb one another's experiences as a means to being able to reach out and appreciate each other's humanity, right? And of course, we teach the mechanics of this at Brave Rangers, but those fundamentals apply to all of us, whether we're president of the United States or just mom or dad trying to figure out how to reconnect with their kids at college.
And something I'd add to that in terms of the self-interest of legislators, even if you're in power, so speaking to blues on the call who might be voting for Democrats, is the status, the popularity of elected officials is not very high. Okay, it's right around the used car salesman. And so the institutions themselves lack credibility and trust. And if when one team is in power, if they dismiss and hold in contempt those who are not in power, it further corrodes respect for the institution. And someday, even in Washington State, it may take a while, someday Republicans will return and they will do likewise. In my state, which has been kind of turning purple, this is Minnesota, the state legislature turns over at least one of the houses about every 2 years. And what I've been told by legislators, smart ones who want to get stuff done, is how you treat the minority will determine how they treat you when you're in the when you're in the minority. How you treat the minority, then this is going to happen to you. And so there is self-interest involved in not in cooperating where you can across differences at that level.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm recalling a conversation I had briefly with Tulsi Gabbard after she spoke to a dinner in Spokane, and asked her about those halcyon days after World War II when people were getting along and there was that recreational mixing and that kind of collegiality between members of different parties. And I asked her if she felt that a piece of that was related to the fact that there was a generation that shared an intense experience of service in World War II. She said, absolutely. Even those who were not combat veterans experienced that kind of tension and that kind of loss and that kind of trauma. Not that I want to put everybody through trauma. We've sort of had a couple of years of, it hasn't drawn us together really well this last couple of years, but how can we somehow create that kind of more of those opportunities for shared experiences? Brave Angels is one place to have some shared experiences. Any ideas of things we might do in our communities to increase those opportunities?
Well, this is part of a pattern of a decline in civic participation. That's some of the bad news here. You asked how we can reverse this. It's a big challenge because since the late 60s or so, there's been a linear decline in memberships in Rotary and League of Women Voters and the PTAs, and so some of the reason why, see, it's too tempting to point the finger at the politicians who used to get along with it. They don't, because they mirror us. And what we need, and I don't know how to get it, is a revival of participation in civic life, where you are working in the Rotary, you're doing good in the community, you're in the League of Women, but you're in these associations, the PTA, with people who may differ from you politically, and that's irrelevant, because we're here to support our school, we're here to, you know, to help our religious congregation prosper. And so it's very complex, and how to revive those is you know, that's a tough one. But what we can do at Braver Angels is our own effort at this, and we can try on our end. So I'll give you an example of something that we've been doing in Minnesota with a member of Congress, Dean Phillips, who is a bipartisan oriented a Democrat. And it was his idea that he needed us to figure out how to make it happen. His idea was he wanted his own version of common ground workshops. He wanted to meet with people in different towns in his district. This is in Minnesota. He wanted Reds and Blues to come together and discuss something that was important to them at the local level that they wanted a member of Congress to hear about, because that had national implications. And so he tried one and it didn't go well. And just at a process level. And so we had done some things with him. So he called me and said, can you help design something that will work better? And so we did. And it's part of our Braver Politics. It's a member, elected official, a red-blue workshop with members of his or her constituency. And so what happens is his office sends out emails to everybody in a geographical area in a certain part of his district, invites them to come to a red blue, and asks them to nominate issues that are a concern to them, that have national and local repercussions, that they would like to talk about across red blue, and they'd like to hear their member of Congress. You know. And so it's a simple design, a 2.5-hour workshop. We talk about healthcare, we talk about immigration, and the member of Congress participates as a member of the group. He's a blue at the meeting. And so that means he pairs up with somebody, as we discuss, he tells his story. And he has said in front of the groups, and to me personally, and I believe him, it is the single most enjoyable thing he does as a member of Congress. We've done 9 of these. The single most enjoyable thing he does. And some of those, there have been some Republicans, some Reds, who have said, you know, I'm still not going to vote for you, but I respect you. And I respect my fellow citizens, even though I disagree. That's an example. We want to spread that throughout Congress, because I think that builds the morale of the member of Congress to intentionally bring people who may not agree with him or her, as well as those who do, and to have a discussion. And I'll tell you this part of it, John, you're talking about the personal part. This is the heart of the workshop. We ask people, like with healthcare, to talk about their concerns about healthcare, and then tell a story, a life experience that influences or informs their concern. Everybody has a couple minutes to prepare that. They share it in a red-blue pair, and then we go around the table. And there's a human connection there with the stories. When you talk about those concerns, you don't know who's a red or a blue. And Dean Phillips tells his story, and it builds something. Now, and I tell them, if we started with, should we have universal federally paid healthcare, it would be like, but a consensus does emerge from these that people should not go bankrupt because of healthcare challenges that they had no control over. This should not happen in this country. Now, how do we get there is complicated, but if we can start those conversations at that level of human concerns and stories, and our elected officials can be part of that, that's an example of what Braver Angels can do.
I know at our little, I'm part of an online news organization, and every year, the last 6 years now, I think I've hosted a Meet the Candidate where we invite everybody who's going to be on the county, the ballot in Spokane County. And there are no political questions. I just want to know, tell me about where you grew up and your first job, and where you went to school, and what you're interested in, and you know what made you decide to run for office. That's all it is.
Yeah.
They're very interesting, and I have to say that I've never talked to anybody that doesn't really want good for the community. And there's some candidates that are like, you have no chance at all, but you're a very nice person, and I know you mean well. I mean, there's to people who are very, really on track to probably win. But every single one of them shares that they have a personal story that has led into their interest in, and they do want good for their community, even if they see a different way of getting there than I might. So we're getting close to where I want to make a pivot to start taking some questions. So if you're thinking about something that you would like to ask personally by going on camera, get ready to raise your hand. And if you just want to put something in the chat, we'll let Yvonne and John take a look at that and see if there's several that match up, they could just mash them together. I got one. Let me see if I had one more question here that I had prepared. While I wait to see if anybody raises their hand. Oh, I see.
A couple hands up. Yeah.
I don't have to go find my notes.
Okay.
We'll let John decide who we're calling. Or
okay. Yeah. And it looks like Sandy Weston, you had your hand up, and after Sandy will be Shane. So go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you very much. And greetings, both Bill and John, and it's so good to be with you this evening.
Hello.
Before I came to tonight's meeting, I was in the Dialogue Across the Divide workshop that was put on by Braver Angels and Bridges USA, and It Starts With Me. That was something I was really interested in hearing, and it was well attended. I heard something there that I did not expect to hear, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. A few people said, I used to be red and I've moved towards blue, or I've used to be blue and I've moved towards red. I'm hearing more of that than I used to. And then, of course, there are some people who says, I'm a centrist. I don't buy into either one of the parties. This is something that is interesting. And then one person said, I would love to hear more from people like that about what moved them. How is it that they are moving in that direction? Is it possible for Braver Angels to put on a panel presentation where people can share their experience? I thought that was a good question of curiosity to bring up, and was wondering if it might be possible.
I think it's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I think that would be an interesting podcast. John, do you know anybody who does podcasts?
I do know some people who do podcasts.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we do have the Braver Angels podcast, which I'm a co-host of occasionally, along with Karen O'Connor, Monica Guzman of Seattle, a name many of you may know, April Lawson Cornfield, and others. And I'm happy to say, by the way, the Braver Angels podcast is December of 2020 was the 159th most popular podcast, politics podcast in America, which is pretty good.
Oh my goodness, really?
Yeah, which is pretty good. Seeing as about 20,000 or so.
Wow!
That's online.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But actually, Sandy, that's a great idea. I'm upset that I cannot take credit for it now that you have said it.
But this is not national; it's not recorded, John. So
that's true. That's true.
but we know
Sandy,
people all over the country will tell.
yeah, that's
There
right.
you go.
What happens in Washington State stays in Washington.
There you go.
Yeah, there you go. It would be a worthwhile discussion to have, Sandy, and I actually will pass that along.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hearing me.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Shane.
Next is Shane, and then after Shane would be Larry.
Great, thanks. It's a real honor to get to speak to you both. One thing I've wondered, so one way to maybe understand some of what Braver Angels does is lessening some of that like affective polarization. Kind of, I sometimes say, it's about not hating the other side, seeking to understand the other side, lowering the temperature, lowering some of the anger and respect and all those things. And I sometimes wonder if, and I don't know if you both have the same perspective on this, if there is anything that would be beyond the pale, in terms of, other positions that people take. And maybe one way to sort of get at this question is, if we still had slavery in this country and one party supported it and one didn't, would Braver Angels say, we don't take a stand and we still want to, we still respect that other side's position. Let's have a worthwhile debate. Or how would you approach that? So again, the sort of overall question is there anything that you would consider to be sort of beyond the pale, or that's out of bounds? We definitely don't like that.
Right. I'm happy to respond to that.
Yeah, and then I would like to, because this was exactly, I'm really glad you asked it, because that was one of the things that people brought up around debating the electoral fraud thing. So it's really important.
Right, and in particular, and if folks were to go and look up the Brave Angels podcast episode where we had this conversation within the team over whether or not to debate voter fraud. And I can't immediately remember the name of that episode. I think it was, why debate voter fraud, maybe, or something like that. My colleague and friend made the point. He said there are Holocaust deniers, in the world, and a few in the United States. That's not a position, though, that has a serious claim to truth, and it's incredibly damaging and offensive. If somebody wanted to debate the Holocaust with Braver Angels, would we play host to that conversation? And my answer to that question, and this isn't to draw direct moral equivalency between Holocaust denial or voter fraud, but just functionally speaking, to use them in a comparative way here. My answer to that question was, if 70 million Americans believe that the Holocaust did not happen, then yes, absolutely, I think we'd have to debate, right? Mm-hmm. What that would mean would be that point of view had seriously gained traction in the collective understanding of reality that the American people share, and that we had broken down in our capacity to collectively reason our way towards truth. And the only way to rehabilitate that process would be for us to create the space and the trust necessary for all of us to be able to engage each other in the process of comparing our understandings of reality and to share and exchange an evaluation of facts as we understand them. And so, yes, I think that it is, I think that part of what becomes difficult is the fact that when we talk about drawing lines, when we talk about our willingness or non-willingness to sort of engage in political conversation with other people, it can't be something that we do or don't do merely on the basis of our having a certain level of comfort with other people's point of views. These conversations are necessary precisely because the disagreements can be uncomfortable. And not just because they are uncomfortable, but because when we fall out of contact with reality, that has damaging consequences for society. But we can't get back into contact with reality unless we are in contact with one another in relationship, right? There is a practical imperative for the health of democracy in our being able to engage each other in the project of reasoning together. But prerequisite to that is social trust, right? And so even if an issue seems beyond the pale, we can't afford to look at the person as being beyond the pale. The one line I would draw is to say that in cases where a person is not genuinely showing up to the conversation in good faith, in cases where a person is not genuinely there with at least a desire to understand his or her fellow American, that's a line worth drawing. But it's not a reflection of the person's policy, right? And furthermore, it would be wrong, I think, of me to assume that I could gauge, the sincerity of that person's intentions merely on the basis of where they stand on a certain issue of politics or policy. So, That's part of how I look at it.
And so I agree, and I want to add two thoughts. One is that there has to be a public policy implication of it for Braver Angels to engage in it. We're not in the truth business. If the Flat Earth Society, which I actually looked up, it does exist. If the Flat Earth Society, if it gained momentum in the U.S. and there were a bunch of people who were flat Earth, if it had no public policy dimension, if it did not relate to political polarization, we would not touch it, even though it was debated. There has to be, even the Holocaust analogy, there'd have to be some public policy implication of that, okay? Because that's our lane. Our lane is public policy and polarization. We're not in the truth business, okay? So secondly, as John alluded to, there would have to be enough people, serious people, elected officials, journalists, editorial writers who were claiming something. That, in other words, that this issue that you or I might see as nonsense or evil has a toehold with people who are elected, who are professionals, who are saying this. And therefore, it's part of the public policy debate in the country. Then we have to be able to address it. And then the third thing, as John said, people have to follow our ground rules. People have to follow our ground rules. If somebody were to, in a pre-interview, suggest that their whole goal was to go in there and just, correct everybody and not listen, we would say you're not invited. And if there's nobody from that group who is prepared to engage with our ground rules, they would not be invited. Fourthly, we have a limited amount of bandwidth, of space for our debates. A certain number of ones we do, a limited number of podcasts. So we have to prioritize things that we think are going to be good for the country. And so what I'm saying is that the hypotheticals, and I realize, and I'm glad you asked this question, and you did it with slavery. The hypotheticals I find not that helpful if they are not connected to a body of people, significant body of people who believe something and with public policy implications. Because otherwise we could come up with any hypothetical and then we say, well, we wouldn't rule it out. But no, with these, so John and I named about 5 things that have to be in place for something that seems like a terrible idea to fall into the category where we would seriously debate it.
Right.
So it isn't just anything goes, because what the heck, all opinions are worth our time.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up is Larry, if you'd like to go ahead. And then after Larry, we're going to take a question from the chat.
Okay. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, and welcome to what we call the other Washington here in the other Washington, or the other Washington, whatever. I spent a good part of the previous question being angry that I didn't get in before Shane, because I want to ask along the same lines, and now I'm thankful that Shane laid some foundation. And I've been involved with Braver Angels since about the 2020 election. And I saw that debate about the voter suppression. And I was amazed that, number one, there was so much discussion about having that topic. It seemed like a no-brainer to have the topic. But I was also I remember that there were a lot of people from the other side. I'm an election believer, I guess you call it, who just said, well, I believe this. I believe there were hundreds of thousands of votes. No proof, no evidence, could not cite anything. And maybe a couple of years ago, Timothy Snyder, you may know him out of Yale, said there's 2 kinds of truth. There's truth that people believe, and there's truth that's supported by evidence. And so I came away like, okay, I understand that you believe there was fraud, but there's no evidence. So I guess along the line of I'm wondering why Braver Angels is not willing, it doesn't seem willing to call out the elephant in the room, no pun intended, and say, look, there's no evidence to this, to your position. There have been people on the abortion issue. Well, I have found the truth in Jesus, and Jesus says it's abortion is murder, and that's it, and everybody's got to accept it. So I'm a little frustrated, and frankly, I've been disappointed in Braver Angels over the last couple of years that you're not addressing what need. I've followed a different model. What need is being met by embracing this fact that's not supported? So I totally agree with seeing the humanity in people and empathy, but I think Braver Angels can do a better job in enforcing those rules and saying, we assume that you're coming to find some common ground, and whether you move your position, that at least you're willing to work with other people. And I'm just wondering, why Braver Angels is not willing to do that. And I find, and just as a side note, I find the debate topics incomprehensible. I think the debate topics are too broad, and 5 people can agree or disagree with the whole thing, and I can't understand what the debate topic is. But I'm wondering why Braver Angels does not seem to be willing to say you can't play in this game. You don't seem willing to
Sure. So let me just push back a little, Larry. That
go ahead.
What John has done a couple of times is articulated, as I've listened to him, what the answer to your question is. You may not accept it, but John, I think, has done a really good job of responding to your very important question. So I hear you that you don't accept his response, but you can say it again, John, but he has articulated the power of relationships on a building trust, and that's where we are. The other thing I'll add is Braver Angels does not take policy positions. We do not come out and say the election was fair, nor are we in the business of adjudicating evidence. Once we go down that path, Larry, and I hear you, and there's a piece of me that agrees with you on that. But the other part is that Braver Angels goes down that path of adjudicating when there is sufficient evidence for something. We're a different organization at that point, and we would not be who we are. And the other thing I'll say, and you said you're blue, this is now what I do as a Braver Angels, is to remind myself of the way in which people on the other side, blue side, that's more my side, around certain issues, ignore scientific facts that don't go along with certain intuitions. Genetically modified organisms would be an example. The folks who have most opposition to the sale, production of genetically modified organisms in crops are mostly blue, and there is overwhelming evidence for the safety of genetically modified organisms. Overwhelming evidence, okay? But it goes against certain kinds of intuitions, and so one could argue, and GMOs there's a public policy piece of GMOs, and our regulators are constantly being berated, mostly by blues, about GMOs. So if we adopted this idea that we should we should be able to weigh in on whether there's evidence for something. We would weigh in on genetically, if we had a debate on the public policies of that, we would adjudicate it and say there's no evidence for it, Mr. and Mrs. Blue. And we're down a path that if we start down, we are going to have to have our expertise. How we're going to get that, I don't know. And I'm speaking with passion now. That we would have to have our experts to know when the fact basis was serious enough, and that we would weigh in on that. We would, in my opinion, it would be not braver angels, it would be a disaster. But having said this, I do acknowledge that for some folks, this is not adequate and they're dissatisfied with braver angels. But I'm assuring you, it's not because we don't think about these things. It's because if we start down that path, I think it's the path to our end as an organization.
So,
Yeah,
so Bill,
we would,
if you-
I think,
sorry.
yeah, if I could just say, yes, I mean, I think we would, just on a structural level, we couldn't do it because if we came down on one side or the other on any issue or set of issues, then we couldn't hire or be run by people who disagreed with whatever that position was. And the point of Braver Angels is that it's one of the few civic enterprises in America that's being, led and pushed forward by people from across the spectrum of opinion on these issues. But put that aside for a moment. I think the simple truth is just that, let's just say for the sake of argument that we might want to take a certain position in a certain direction. Having truth does not make it persuasive. In the absence of trust, information, even accurate information alone, accomplishes absolutely nothing. You may believe that the CDC had it right on the legitimacy of the science behind COVID vaccine. You may believe that the election officials and the courts had it right with respect to the preponderance of evidence or lack thereof, rather indicating that the election was stolen. But what winds up happening is that we look at our institutions, we look at the courts, we look at the Congress, we look at the media, we look at the academy, we look at the churches perhaps and corporations, depending on who's running them at any given moment, as carrying water for the agenda of whatever that side is. And so each of us have our own authorities that we trust on the basis of our sense that they are actually looking out for us, whereas the other folks aren't. For many Republicans and many conservatives, they don't necessarily, need to have all of the information available to them with respect to what happened on with the 2020 election, because as far as they're concerned, they already know that CNN is out to get Donald Trump. They already know that the universities have no commitment to truth because they're pushing a woke agenda. They already know that the people who are telling them that they should trust the system are the same people who are corrupting the system. But they've got politicians and media figures who they do feel are looking out for their interests. And so all the benefits of the doubt go to them. And similarly going the other way. I mean, Democrats didn't necessarily know everything there was to know about, what relationship Donald Trump may or may not have had to Russia, but they knew who they trusted and who they didn't. And Republicans, at the time had a trust in the White House, had a trust in the people who were running the executive branch, because these were individuals who put themselves forward as looking out for their interests, right? We trust the Justice Department depending on who's running it, right? We trust the media depending on what channel we're on. Trust is the key variable here, not the accuracy of the information. Yes, the accuracy of the information is important, but it's only deliverable in a context of trust, both between groups and also between groups and institutions, right? So it's this trust piece that we're working on at Braver Angels, but even that can only unfold in the process of relationships, right? And so, the pattern has been that many of us feel that there is accurate information out there, that legitimate institutions delivering this accurate information should be able to sort of hold the floor in a way that pushes all of the alternative narratives out, because there's no such thing as alternative facts. And I definitely agree with that as a matter of principle, right? However, that way of actually sort of approaching public conversation, public persuasion, it's not really a serious way of trying to persuade anybody of anything, because if there are factors in the environment which prevent people from trusting your intentions, your motivations, whether as an individual, a political party, or an institution, there is no incentive for people to actually listen to what you have to say. And so we start at the base level of trying to get people to trust each other as human beings again, regardless of their politics. And I think that creates the space for people to reason together again in a way that can cause them to revisit their assumptions about what is true and what is false. But the fundamental layers are relationships and trust. And only from there can you get to the point of rehabilitating the conversation over truth.
Thank you, John. That was very passionate from both of you. We're going to move on to John Moran, who has a question from the chat.
Yeah, I've got a question, and after my question, we'll go ahead and let you pose yours, Patty. So this is a question from a participant. She says, last month I participated in a Braver Angels forum about how should schools talk about gender. This is the first that I had seen where Braver Angels put a toe in the water about the contentious issues surrounding our marginalized transgender communities. Will there be more offerings to discuss this issue, and not just related to schools? There have been more than 200 anti-trans laws being proposed at the state level this year.
Yeah, I think that the short answer to that question is yes. It's an issue that is growing in the awareness and the political significance of American society. There's no reason we should not talk about it and engage in more in Braver Angels, and every reason to. And so, yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add than that. I think you can expect to see more programming dealing with that subject matter in the future.
Okay, great. Okay.
Quickly, before you get to Patty, let me just say that I know that in our alliance, some other alliances can do the same thing. We've also had opportunities in our own monthly meetings to have, not in a workshop format, but to do some structured conversations where people can express how they feel about a different, and make sure that we're all listening. A living room conversation is one of those. And so certainly if you're involved with your local alliance, those are conversations that you could ask if they could have.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, Patty, could you go ahead with your question?
Yeah, hi, I'm in Seattle, and my question today, for the first time, I had talking across political lines. So I met with someone in Virginia who identifies as red and identify as blue, and it was fabulous. I love the way I want to, first of all, kudos to Braver Angels. I love the way the conversation's set up, and we're both really looking forward to the second conversation, for a deeper dive. And I just was heartened by how we really saw each other as human beings. So it was wonderful. So my question is, how do you match people? Well, I'll just leave it at that. How do you match people? How did she and I get matched? How do you get people from both the blue and the red to come to you? Yeah, that's it.
Well, Donna Murphy of Braver Angels does all that. And she does it on the basis of people signing up and looking for a partner. For those of you who don't know this is our one-to-one conversations. And we have them red, blue, and urban, rural, and across color lines and generational lines. There's a new one that's going to be piloted soon on police and Black men. And so these are like little mini workshops designed for people to have structured one-to-one conversations. And so people apply to do this, Patty, and then Donna assigns people to have them. So it's she does the individual matching.
So I thought I had heard somewhere that it's harder to find red people.
Yes, it's harder to yeah.
Do you go out and look for people, or you just wait for people to come?
Well, so some of this is, again, I want to give Donna all the credit. She goes and finds red-leaning organizations who say, hey, we could validate this. A lot of Reds are very worried about have the crap beat out of them in a one-to-one conversation, that they'd be called a racist within the first 5 minutes. Let's be clear. And so it's sometimes if Donna finds an organization that says, no, these folks are good and you're not going to get beat up. And so then they make their folks available. So that's some of the artists. Now I think we're up to now 1,300 one-to-one conversations,
Really?
and we're up over 2,300 workshops at Braver Angels. So anyway, these are really taking off, and they're quite powerful. I've done them myself and have really loved them.
Thank you both. We're going to move to a question that came through the chat from Amy H. And she says, please will one of you speak to the difficulty of engaging Reds? Amy lives in Northern Idaho, and even there's difficulty in having Reds being interested in Braver Angels.
Yeah. So, there are a number of factors in the environment that I think contribute to the difficulty here. Now, first of all, let me say that there are actually hundreds of civic bridge building organizations in America, and doing great work. But you look at their composition, the folks they engage in, they tend to be overwhelmingly left-leaning, right? Braver Angels has by far the largest membership and engagement rate with Republicans and conservatives, with the perhaps the lone exception of Bridge USA, our partner on campus, campus-based group committed to depolarization. But there are a few things. I think that there's a sort of a suspicion of depolarization-oriented work that sort of goes along the lines of feeling that what this really is in many cases are sort of subtle efforts by educated progressives to bring conservatives into spaces where they are promised to be able to show up as who they are, but the hidden goal is to actually sort of tutor them and to sort of tame the savage Republican, if you will, into being someone who can then see the light in terms of embracing a more progressive worldview. And there's a little bit of truth to that, because there have been a number of enterprises along these lines ostensibly that have kind of functioned in that way. So to the extent to which some people are sort of aware of that somewhere in their minds, there's often an assumption that, well, this must be something like that. I think it's also true that there was a need for Braver Angels before 2016, I think, but it did come into being in the aftermath of Donald Trump's victory in 2016. And I think that many Republicans and certainly Trump voters look at any work engaging in depolarization and figure, well, this is actually sort of a response to Trump and therefore is anti-Trump. Therefore, why would I want to be there? Because a space like this would be prejudiced against myself. Some people do posit sort of a psychological explanation along the lines of the idea that, well, maybe liberals as personalities tend to be more interested in exploring spaces, new diverse social spaces, and an interest in new experiences, where conservatives temperamentally are more interested in sort of preserving their own environments, or more comfortable staying in more familiar environments. Bill, I don't know if that's a notion you give.
No, I think that's accurate.
Right. So, there may be some native psychological sort of explanations for this as well. But all of it just sort of equals the fact that there's a little bit of extra work to be done in getting conservatives to the table. Having said that, we would not have made the progress that we've made to date if it weren't the case that there are not many conservatives and Republicans and right-leaning folks in America who really do want to rebuild relationships of trust and understanding with their fellow Americans. So it's hard work, but it's eminently doable.
I will say, as a Red who jumped into the Central Eastern Washington Alliance, I immediately found myself doing a number of different jobs filling in, because we need to recruit more Reds. So I'm one of 6 co-chairs. We have 3 red and 3 blue. And all of us who are there who are Red would love to get more, because then we wouldn't have to be having so much of that.
Right,
Let's try and squeeze in maybe just one or two more questions. We want to try and respect your time and end on time. I think there's hands I see from John Williams
Sounds
and from
good.
Sharon Lonergan.
Yeah, it looks like Sharon had her hand up first, I think, and then John would be after Sharon, and then probably that's about all that we'd have time for.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Nice to see you all. I admire you both so much. So thank you for everything you've done for our country. Truly, it's a service to our country. So thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick note, as a red, one other thing I would posit is that for us red, maybe we don't feel like we have as much to learn about the blue side because we swim in blue culture all day long, right? Like our news, Hollywood, entertainment. I am well versed in the position of blues.
You speak blue pretty well.
So yeah, so I mean, one way I try to sell Braver Angels is like, come get a better understanding of why the other side thinks what it does, and then people are like, I get it every day. I don't need to go to a meeting and get more of it. So just a thought.
Sure.
But one thing I wanted to add, so I actually last weekend I led, I'm Catholic, and my priest asked me to lead a session for our parish. He's doing an entire year focused on healing, so different aspects of healing and bringing in speakers. And he knew I was active in this space, so he said, can you give a session for our parishioners on bridging the political divide? And what I have found when I try to engage with people is I have to first sell them on the need for it. Like, we're all so tribal right now and really protective of our tribes. And so similar to some of the concerns issued here, like, why would I want to engage in a way that gives somebody with harmful ideas a platform to express them? So I actually spent a good deal in my workshop just trying to convince people that it was even worthwhile to engage in that conversation. So I shared some testimonials of people that, I've worked with here in Braver Angels, of the benefit that they've had, not only politically, but personally, from learning these skills. But I also shared Daryl Davis and his experience. If you all are familiar with him, he's an African-American man who has converted hundreds of people out of the KKK because he simply gave them the space to express their ideas. So similar to what you all were talking about, showing people respect. So even though their ideas are gross and truly harmful, Daryl was able to engage with that in a way where he still, maintained his own dignity in his own positions, but gave people space to engage. And then, as you all were saying, opened up the door to be able to bring truth, to shed light into that space and bring people over. So just all of that to, excuse me, sorry. But all that is to be said, maybe Braver Angels should consider part of its programming just being like why it even matters, like testimonials and kind of persuasive pieces. I don't know if that's a podcast piece or maybe there's an extra element of that programming to convince people to come on board.
Yeah, so just really briefly, and we should be careful of our time here. Sharon, with all respect, I've never, ever given a presentation where people didn't agree we have a huge national problem of polarization. So I don't know if that's what you're saying, because I've never had to prove that. The one thing Americans agree on is that we are highly divided and that's paralyzing us. And most people know it's showing up in their homes and their families, their community. So maybe I'm not understanding whether they personally are going to do something about it, but in terms of the nature of the problem, that nobody has to be convinced there's a problem.
Right, I agree with you.
Right.
But for a lot of people, there's a question: why would I want to do that?
Right.
Why would I want to do that?
Yeah. And that one for me is, and whenever I've run into that, is who else? We have a serious national problem. I begin with the historians say we are more divided than we were since the Civil War. It's invaded all aspects of our society. And so if somebody wants to opt out of it, it's up to them. But if we're citizens of this country and we care about our families and extended clans, I mean, this is what I say. and that you leave it to somebody else or you work on it. I'd be happy to engage more, but there's something there that I don't know what the setup is something, but I personally, and I've given probably hundreds of talks, I have not run into what you're describing. So I'd be interested to know, feel free to email me, what's happening that you're getting that pushback from people who are coming to a class on healing. There's something not quite adding up there that I'd be happy to engage with you about. So we should look about time here, but yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well, Sharon, if you're getting to the idea of like, why would I want to do a thing like this? Because I actually do get that. Like, why would I personally want to do this, right? And one, you might not. I mean, what we do isn't necessarily for everybody's daily activity. But if you do choose to do it, you have the opportunity to empower yourself as a communicator, to be a more effective advocate for the things that you believe. You have the opportunity to learn something that might complete your understanding, because lo and behold, you're probably not right on everything. The other side might have a point. You have the opportunity to actually develop meaningful relationships that can transform your life. And that has been the story of so many people, red and blue and purple and otherwise, who have come through Braver Angels work. And you have the opportunity to make this country a better place. Those are all, I think, pretty good reasons why.
Okay, I think John Williams, we've got you. I think you're getting the last question, and we'll have to make it brief.
Yeah, we got 90 seconds here. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say I'm so honored to listen to you two. I was very impressed. Bill, I remember you from Smart Marriage Days. I'm a counselor myself. I believe in this cause very much. When I first heard about it, I wanted to be a volunteer to help do workshops. But I ran across the problem of I am so angry at the other party that I find myself, I just become unglued. I'm so worried about becoming upset. I've actually engaged in a couple of workshops and I started listening to my opponent, my fellow citizens' point of view, and I just started getting nuts, emotional, upset, and I can't listen. And so I'm just wondering if other people ran into this, that I can't volunteer or even participate in programs because I am so upset at the other party. I just go nuts. I blank out. I become like, so other people experience that, like they want to be part of the programs, but they just don't think they can stomach listening to the other person's argument.
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people who do not come for that reason.
So that helps explain Sharon's question.
Yeah, you're not alone. And so it's very vulnerable for you to say that, John. And I know you've had a background in working in communication and so on. So I really appreciate your saying that. That's very open and vulnerable. I can just offer one little tidbit here, and that is what helps me when I get angry is to not focus on the party of this person or what they're part of, but this human being in front of me, and disconnect from what I think of the party, the leaders, because I can get in a high dudgeon at that level, and I try not to let it bleed over to this actual human being who's here in front of me. That's what I try to do. But I appreciate
it. Yeah. There's the whole challenge of how anyone could hold that position. I don't have respect, and anyway. This is the problem. I don't like to be this way, but here we are.
I hear you. We may need some extra therapeutic sessions for the highly reactive members of Braver Angels who aspire to more, but who are blocked that way. So thank you. It's very open and vulnerable, and you're sharing this.
It's not to equate anybody's politics. It's not to equate anybody's politics with the forces of evil by any means. But Martin Luther King Jr. said that the philosophy of nonviolence was aimed towards forces of evil and not towards the human beings who are merely caught in those forces, right? And so we really are different than the opinions that we hold.
Thank you. I certainly agree with that principle.
I appreciate that you are here and aspiring to listen. That is admirable. I know that Yvonne has put in the chat a link to the debate on that occurred in 2021 after the election. I want to redirect you also to wa.braverangels.org for the Washington Alliance links. And there was the most recent Braver Angels podcast on the national page is What Liberals Miss About Conservatives. And that may provide some insights to anyone who's trying to think about how to listen to the other side. Might find that useful. I want to give the last word to you, Bill, and then we will close this out.
Not you, John.
Well, that's
Last word to me.
age before beauty.
Age
Bill.
before beauty. Well, just on behalf of me and John, it's been an honor to be on this call. And that Washington State is a real pillar in Braver Angels. In fact, Minnesota is a pillar too, and we got to kind of keep puffing and puffing to keep up with you guys. So a little competition. So happy to support this state. There's today I met with a funder who is very interested in promoting the work here and nationally. So you guys are right out in leadership nationally, and so just very happy to be in this conversation with you here and support your work.
Indeed.
Okay, well, I want to give thanks to Yvonne and to John Moran for taking care of the technical stuff behind the scenes. They put in a lot of time to make this work. To John and to Bill for joining us for an hour and a half and for coming out to Washington and working with our county commissioners and our county executives. We're going to play the music and go check out the chat, collect any links that you need, and then we'll end the meeting.